Hello, I'm Nick Clark. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your look at the world of business and economics. This week, the man who saved the euro takes on navigating Italy through the pandemic. Can he turn around the long-struggling economy? Also this week, Libya has a unified government. The task ahead, pulling together war-torn East and West, including the country's two central banks. And Chile takes a long, hard look at its open economy as China swoops in to buy up everything from power to agriculture businesses. So, as the European debt crisis spread across the continent, threatening its biggest southern economies, one man is credited with saving the euro. With his vow to do whatever it takes, Mario Draghi, the then president of the European Central Bank, threw water on the market's raging fire. Then he may have had luck on his side. The politics that had thrown Greece, Ireland and Portugal to the wolves changed as French and German banks realised they could be wiped out if Italy and Spain were in the firing line. Now, as the Prime Minister of Italy, leading the 69th government since the Second World War, it appears he's taking his luck with him. Where other governments have failed, Draghi could once again be using other people's money to turn things around. During the pandemic, Italy has recorded the most deaths of any European Union country, but with a stuttering vaccine rollout, Draghi blocked the export of AstraZeneca vaccines to Australia. With debts of more than 150% of GDP, Brussels has relaxed the rules on budget deficits, giving economies more breathing room. The economy contracted the most of any European Union country, but Italy stands to be the biggest winner from the 750 billion euros the European Union has set aside to help economies. Its share could be 208 billion euros over the next 6 years. And that is something his predecessors have never been afforded. They have been forced to cut costs and services to keep markets and its northern neighbours happy. So, can Mario Draghi last more than 13 months, the average term of an Italian government? Well, let's find out. Joining me now from Rome via Skype is Angelika Donati, CEO of international property developer Donati Immobiliare. Angelika, welcome to the programme. Good to have you here. So all the political parties have fallen behind Mario Draghi, fallen in line with him, which is quite unusual in Italian politics, isn't it? What's changed this time?
I think what has changed is the fact that everybody acknowledges and recognizes the fact that it's a do-or-die situation. Italy has to get it right. We have to get our recovery fund planning right. We only have until the end of April to prepare the plan. We have to get a vaccination program right. We have no time left to waste. And Mario Draghi is internationally and domestically recognized as one of the most competent, most prestigious Italians out there. So it was a no-brainer. It was the only option possible. Right.
He's also got to tackle these deep-rooted problems, isn't he, of slow growth, low productivity, high debt. How can he go about that, do you think?
Well, the monies that are coming in will definitely help boost Italian productivity. Estimates are that it should boost GDP by 4 percentage points per annum, which is a great start. And he's having to tackle the issues that you rightly mentioned, which are all rooted in one fundamental problem, which is that Italy is drowning in bureaucracy, and it is slow, it is inefficient. So he's moving really quickly to try and also tackle the problem of the slowness and inefficiencies in our public administration system, trying to innovate it, trying to digitize it, and that needs to be the starting point to fix everything else.
And this 200 billion euros from the EU Recovery Fund, how is that money likely to be spent? Where will it go?
It will go across 6 main pillars that were identified in the initial layout of the plan. A lot of it is going to go into infrastructure investment. As we all know, the Italian infrastructure network is pretty much obsolete. Most of it was built after the Second World War. So we need to tackle that issue. We need to continue building out our railway networks. A lot is going to go into, as we mentioned, digitization. And of course, a massive chunk is going to go into sustainability, into energy efficiency, because Italy, as with the rest of the EU, has to meet the Green New Deal targets. We need to target zero carbon emissions by 2050. And so a lot will be invested in sustainability as well.
Draghi advocating, of course, increasing the country's debt burden, which is already one of the highest in Europe. But what kind of problems might that create down the line?
Well, the big elephant in the room is what will happen once EU regulation on debt ceilings, which has been relaxed for the COVID pandemic, is reintroduced, and how that will be reintroduced. Of course, Draghi is a very prominent figure within the EU, so it will be his job to negotiate Italy's position. But what's also being done at the moment with the recovery fund monies is that in many cases they're being used to substitute debt. So the recovery fund debt is being used to replace old, more expensive debt to try and make the Italian debt burden more sustainable.
So the first government bond sale under Draghi was offloaded at record low interest rates, wasn't it? The markets like this man, don't they?
Markets love him. I mean, he's the man behind whatever it takes. He is a beacon of hope, not just for Italy, but for Europe. He's the person who kept Europe together the last time we had a massive crisis, and therefore he's considered to be the best man for the job in Italy now.
What about his approach to jobs then and to women in work? Women have, of course, been hardest hit by the pandemic, and you wonder what Draghi can do to ensure that reforms and recovery are inclusive.
Absolutely. It's actually devastating if you look at the statistics. Of the jobs lost in 2020, 70% were lost by women. And that just goes to show that besides the massive pay gap, there is also a massive inequality when it comes to Italian women having access to the labor market and being still being forced to choose between their family and their jobs. Italy is a laggard in European rankings in terms of female inclusivity on the labor market, and it was estimated that just reaching European averages would boost Italian GDP by 88 billion. So finding a way to reach a more equal distribution between men and women is just good for business. And I think Draghi will have to invest heavily in welfare schemes, which are designed to aid women's return to the job market and to ensure that it is a more equal playing field.
Right. I mean, how much support will he get from government about those sort of concepts?
I think he must get full support. We have a ministry that is devoted just to equality and family matters with Minister Bonetti. And they made it very clear that female inclusivity is top of their agenda, as they rightly should be.
And what about the industry that you work in, Angelica? It's hugely crucial to the economy. What do you think he'll do on that front?
So as you rightly said, the construction industry is crucial to the economy. And what's very interesting is that the Italian Construction Industry Association, ANCE, analyzed the proposals in the recovery plan. And they found that 51% of funds allocated to Italy will touch our industry in one way or another. And this is essential because the construction industry is at the tail end of a 12-year-long crisis. We've had a 33% reduction in production. We've lost 600,000 jobs. Tens of thousands of companies have failed. And we're faced with a country that is crumbling. As we mentioned before, the whole infrastructure system needs to be upgraded, but our cities also need to be upgraded. Let's not forget that Italy is one of the main tourist destinations in the world. And to encourage tourists to continue traveling to Italy, we need to maintain our cities. We need to maintain our transportation networks. Our schools are falling apart. Those need to be rebuilt. There is so much that needs to be done. And so much of this, it touches the construction industry.
So back to the question, finally, that we started with. Can he last more than 13 months?
That's a very good question. I think his immediate priority is to make sure that the vaccine rollout happens on schedule and even better than schedule. The promise that was made was that everybody would be vaccinated by the end of the summer. And his other main goal is the recovery plan. He is saying that his goals are those, and he's not planning to take on a more political role. Obviously, from my perspective, I grew up abroad. I've always admired him greatly. I hope he can stay as long as possible.
All right. Angelica Donati, appreciate your perspective. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you for having me, Nick.
Now, the fall of Muammar Gaddafi's dictatorship in 2011 brought a decade of anarchy to Libya, with the UN-backed government in the west pitched against warlord Khalifa Haftar from the east. But in recent weeks, the United Nations has brokered a deal to end the political turmoil. The unified government, led by Prime Minister-designate Abdulhamid Dbeibah, has the task of fixing a war-torn economy. It may surprise many that Libya had two central banks. The Eastern Central Bank, based in Tripoli, has issued debts now worth more than $23 billion. Its creaky oil infrastructure could hold back its recovery. It's currently pumping oil at a rate of 1.25 million barrels a day. It hopes to get back to 1.45 million barrels by the end of 2021, but that's still 200,000 barrels short of what it was producing before Gaddafi was toppled. The economy crashed 66.7% last year, and that just underlines the new unified government's to-do list, which includes fixing the water, electricity and housing infrastructure. Let's talk about all of this. Let's cross to Tarik Yousef, who's joining us now from Doha via Skype. Tarik is the director of the Brookings Doha Centre and a board member of the Central Bank of Libya. Tarik, welcome. So first up, after the civil war, is there an estimate as to what the rebuild costs will be?
I don't think we have any updated estimates regarding the rebuilding costs. But if you go back to 2011, after the toppling of the old regime took place, people had advanced figures as high as $100 billion back then. In the subsequent few years, some of the destruction that took place in the city of Benghazi alone was estimated to cost or require about $50 billion. So we're talking about tens of billions, maybe hundreds of billions of dollars in order to restore Libya's services, rebuild the infrastructure, and certainly, and more importantly, from the perspective of average citizens, put Libya on the right path towards prosperity, stability, and the kind of standard of living that people hope to achieve.
Absolutely. It's an extraordinary amount of money, isn't it? So where's it going to come from?
And that is the conundrum. That's the biggest challenge, arguably, facing not just Libya's institutions, but the country as a whole. The money simply isn't there. The last 10 years were used to essentially cover mostly current expenditures, salaries, subsidies, and to a much lesser extent, any development allocations, meaning the kind of projects and funding for housing, electricity, public health, not to mention the destruction, the lost output, the damaged infrastructure and capital. The money at the moment is not available within Libya's existing savings, available resources. And more importantly, given what oil prices are, given Libya's oil production, you're not going to be able to do a lot of rebuilding relying solely on the country's resources. You'll have to look for options abroad, but this is happening at a time when massive debts have been run by all countries. Libya remains a very unattractive destination for foreign capital. And so this puts Libyan policymakers and its institutions in a very difficult position. How to manage and fund current needs while also investing for the future, rebuilding the economy, rebuilding the infrastructure, restoring services. The magnitude of what is required far exceeds certainly what is available at the moment.
And anyway, a big problem before was this consistent international competition for what would be lucrative contracts. How do you avoid that again?
Well, you'll have to avoid that by restoring the sovereignty of Libya, the government, and its people. But then you'll have to work through a backlog that goes back to pre-2011 of contracts that were suspended, stopped, were never completed. And you'll have to start thinking about priorities for the coming period. So how do you, on the one hand, keep and minimize foreign interference, while on the other hand, establish priorities and decide how you want to fund those priorities? It is a task of monumental importance, difficulty, and certainly one for a country that's just emerging from a civil war and where a national unity government has only been in place now for a few weeks. I would say Libya is in a better position today than it was just a few months ago, but things remain fragile, and how far you can achieve all the objectives that the public has, that Libyans have of their country, remains to be seen, and will be one that we'll have to pay attention to over the next few years.
Yeah, and so what's the best way then of navigating these kind of clashing, in some cases, clashing international interests?
I would say part of what we've observed in the last few months, and perhaps that is why the ceasefire that was signed in September, October last year has remained in place. There was a lot of international fatigue, or fatigue amongst the countries competing for influence in Libya. You also saw the Biden administration come in and begin to restore the stabilizing role that the US had historically played. You also have the COVID-19 lockdowns and the preoccupation in all foreign capitals with domestic issues. All of this has essentially bought Libyans some time, kept foreign actors busy elsewhere, and has given the country space to be able to start putting the building blocks together. Will this last post-2021? We don't know yet. But if we can, Libyans, the National Unity Government, can take the necessary steps to restore sovereignty, to build on this national unity trajectory, rehabilitate domestic institutions, and bring some coherence to the country's finances, I think we could give ourselves, and the country could give itself, a very good chance of emerging in 2022 on a better foundation with essentially control over its destiny, as opposed to what we observed in 2019, 2020.
Okay, so just going to jump in there, just because we just need to wrap up. But as part of bringing financial coherence to the country is the budget, the 2021 budget. How important is that, and will it get wholesale approval?
I think it's a very critical test for the National Unity Government. Heightened expectations amongst the public about what this government is going to be able to do is going to push the budget envelope quite high. Whether that, in fact, is consistent with the country's available resources remains to be seen. I think at minimum, this would require a very close cooperation, coordination between the various actors in the country. The government, the central bank, the audit bureau, the national oil company. We've not seen that yet. We've not even seen the budget yet. But that will be one of the earliest and most critical tests of whether this government is able to do both short-term needs and focus at the same time on building a foundation for long-term stability and prosperity.
Tarik Yousef, fantastic to get your view on this. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Okay, Chinese state-owned companies have a growing influence in Chile, considered Latin America's most open free market economy. It's raising concerns about the country's future economic independence. A group of bipartisan politicians are proposing a law to limit Chinese companies' participation in key and strategic industries. But as Lucia Newman reports from the central city of Chimbarongo, that's not as easy as it may sound.
From the billion-dollar acquisition of one of the world's largest salmon companies, to the purchase of copper and lithium mines, to wineries and fruit fields, China has set its sights on Chile. It may be a small country, but it has a very long and strategic Pacific coastline and lots of resources that the Asian giant needs. But that's not the only attraction.
The most important thing for China is have a window shop in the region. Okay, in order to say, here we are in Chile, it's the most stable country in Latin America.
But while Chile's economic growth owes a great deal to China, members of Congress are warning of an aggressive investment offensive, not from private capital, but from the Chinese state.
If you don't regulate the participation of a foreign state in your economy, that economy could be nationalised, not by our own country, but rather by a foreign state. That's why we've presented a bipartisan bill to level the playing field for everyone, because we're facing an offensive by the Chinese state that wants to take over strategic sectors of the economy.
The congressman has co-drafted a proposal that seeks to regulate foreign state ownership in strategic and geopolitical sectors of the economy. On the top of his list is the Chinese state's majority control of electricity distribution in Chile. Cherry orchards like the one you see here may not seem to fit that description, but Chinese companies are increasingly buying more and more agricultural land, like this farm, to produce one of Chile's prime exports, fruit, especially cherries. And that's raising concerns that China may be moving towards producing, packing, and exporting its own fruit, eventually eliminating the Chilean entrepreneur altogether. 6 weeks ago, at the height of peak season, billion-dollar cherry exports to China ground to an abrupt halt.
It's very suspicious. Exactly when we started debating this bill in Congress, the social networks in China, who we all know are controlled by the state, began denouncing that our cherries had traces of COVID-19.
Chile's foreign ministry refuses to entertain the notion of foul play, at least publicly. But Navarro is not alone in suspecting that China was sending a veiled message, that there's a high price to pay if Chile decides to limit China's economic influence. Lucia Newman, Al Jazeera, Chimbarongo, Chile.
The future of the Falkland Islands is being discussed again after they were excluded from trade deals between the UK and the EU. The British Overseas Territory will not be part of any commercial, tax or customs agreements. And as Teresa Bo reports, Argentina's government sees an opportunity.
The Falklands Islands in the southern Atlantic, also known as Malvinas for people in Latin America, are considered part of the overseas territories of the United Kingdom. But 2 days after finalizing the Brexit agreement, the European Union announced that it would stop recognizing overseas territories under British rule, and the benefits that came along. The decision came as a surprise for residents of the islands.
None of the other overseas territories were allowed to vote in the referendum, even though it affected us. But we respected that decision afterwards. But it was kind of a bit of a shock, I think, when the result came through, because we hadn't really expected that relationship to change. That next piece of the puzzle does need to be addressed, because the EU OTs need a relationship with the UK and UK OTs as well.
For years, industries here have benefited from being a member state, until now. James Wallace is concerned about what's coming next.
I find it very concerning. The situation is that at the moment any fish or squid that we export to Europe will attract a tariff of between 6 and 18%. I mean, to give you an idea, in terms of the conservative view based on our recent financial performance, that 6% represents 30% on average of our profits over the last 5 years, so it's extremely disturbing.
The decision by the EU was perceived as a victory for Argentina, which has been demanding the Falklands or Malvinas Islands, the South Georgia and the South Sandwich Islands belongs to them.
The sovereignty dispute over the islands led to a war between Britain and Argentina in 1982. It lasted for 74 days and left almost 1,000 dead. In spite of losing the war, Argentina continues to demand that the islands are part of their territory inherited from the Spanish colonial rule.
Daniel Filmus, who is in charge of the Malvinas issue in Argentina, says his government is going to continue pushing for a negotiation.
We are still in the early stages after Brexit, but Europe has signalled a change in its position on the islands. There was a similar case at the UN on the Chagos archipelago. The UK lost 114 to 6 and has 6 months to return the island to Mauritius. The only EU country to vote for the UK was Hungary.
On the islands, Argentina's ambitions are perceived as a threat. That's why people here are hoping their needs from now on won't be ignored. Teresa Bo, Al Jazeera, Buenos Aires.
And that is our show for this week. If you'd like to comment on anything you've seen, you can tweet me at Nick Clark Al Jazz. Please use the hashtag AJCTC or just drop us an email. countingthecost@aljazeera.net is our address. There's plenty more for you online too at aljazeera.com/CTC, and that will take you straight to our page, which has entire episodes for you to catch up on. That is it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Nick Clark from the whole team. Thanks for joining us. The news on Al Jazeera is coming up.